Now, in the waking state, we may say so many things about the deep sleep state, because we have no clear idea of what sleep is. If we make proper research into sleep, we will discover that there is no difference between sleep and jnana. We can now take sleep as an example of the happiness that is enjoyed in the absence of the I, world, and God. Our love of sleep proves our love of egolessness, as Bhagavan implies in verse 3 of Uladu Narpadu. That state devoid of I is agreeable to everyone. What we now call sleep appears to be limited because, on waking, we rise again as I. But jnana has no such limitation, so the happiness of jnana is unlimited. Nowadays, people try to glorify Bhagavan by saying that he is great because he said something that Buddha said, something else that Christ said, and so on, as if his greatness could not stand by itself. Christ, Buddha, Shankara, Ramakrishna, and others were all great examples of jnanis, but outwardly they roamed about arguing, teaching, and founding religions, whereas Bhagavan is jnana itself, so he just kept quiet. It is absurd to try to show his greatness in the light of these jnanis because his greatness is the self-shining source of all light. Doing so is like propping a bamboo at the foot of Arunachala and saying that we are helping the hill to stand, whereas in fact many such bamboos can grow on it. We are told that we project the world, but this does not mean that the seer is the projector. We, the seer, the mind or ego, are part of the projection, as Bhagavan says in verse 160 of Guru Vachaka Kovai. The false person or soul who behaves as I occurs as one among the shadow pictures in this world picture, which is like a cinema show. Who is this I we say is the projector? By investigating who am I, the non-existence of both the projector and its projection will be exposed. Arguments about world and God are futile, as Bhagavan teaches us in verses 2 and 3 of Uladu Narpadu. The manyness of the world allows for dualities such as real or unreal, conscious or non-conscious, happy or miserable. Where there is duality, there will be doubt. Self is one, devoid of duality, so self-knowledge will allow no room for dualities or doubts. Therefore, we should avoid doing research on God or the world and should instead do research only on I. I will then disappear, along with both God and the world. The resulting state of egolessness is agreeable to everyone, as shown by our experience of sleep. If I is taken to be a form, the world and God will also be experienced as forms. Even the conception of a formless God is a mental form or image. Nirguna dhyana, or formless worship of God, is futile effort, like a person chasing the horizon in order to touch the all-pervading space. Reality cannot be found by meditation. What is attending to the mind and its images? It can only be found by non-meditation, which is self-attention. However, Bhagavan said we should not think that saguna worship of God as a form, is useless. We should practice either saguna worship or self-attention. In verse 4 of Uladu Narpadu, Bhagavan asks, what is seen be otherwise than the I that sees it? That is, the nature of what is experienced cannot be different to the nature of what experiences it. Therefore, the appearance of the world and God depends upon the appearance of the seer, I, and their forms depend upon the seer's form. The I is also used in Tamil to mean jnana, knowledge or consciousness. So the endless, limitless, or infinite I is self, which, being limitless and formless, can see only limitlessness and formlessness. Therefore, self can never see any name or form, nor anything other than itself. It experiences only formless self-awareness. I am. This is expressed by Bhagavan in verse 27 of Sri Arunachala Aksharamana Malai. O Arunachala, son of bright rays that swallows everything, the entire appearance of the universe. That is, in the light of pure self-awareness, which is Arunachala, the ego, I, the world, and God will all disappear. When there is body consciousness, there is world consciousness. If none of the five sheaths were experienced as I, neither the world nor God could be seen. The world and God are therefore created by our misidentifying a body to be I. Hence, the creator of both the world and God is only the I that mistakes itself to be a body. So we should investigate who is this I. From this we can infer that the world and God are only as real as the idea I am this body. And since this body identification is unreal, so too are this world and God. How are vasanas, mental propensities or dispositions, to be erased? Now we take these vasanas to be I or mine. This gross body is itself an expansion of them. In sleep we do not experience any of them, so we assume that they remain then in seed form, and in order to explain the seeming ignorance of sleep, which exists only in the view of our waking mind, we postulate a causal body, whose form is conceived to be the sum total of all vasanas. This causal body seems to veil or obscure our pure self-awareness, and hence it is conscious only of a state of dark ignorance. However, by practicing self-attention in the waking state, we will become more clearly conscious of our self-awareness in spite of the play of our vasanas, and thus we will be conscious of it even during sleep. The vasanas will then be seen as shadows created by the dim light of our mind, which is a reflection of the bright light of self-awareness. So long as we attend to vasanas and their products, our thoughts and desires and the objects of the world, we will continue to take them to be I or mine, and thus to be bound by them. However, if we ignore our vasanas and instead attend only to I, we will destroy them. That is, we will expose their non-existence. We should not be put off by the strength of our vasanas and by their seeming endless play. We should remember that they appear because I am, but they do not come to trouble us during sleep, even though we continue to exist then. Therefore, I am real and vasanas are unreal. With this strong conviction, we should be courageous and remain disinterested in our vasanas, and thus we should carry on self-attention undisturbed. Bhagavan gave us the following definition of reality. Only that which is everlasting, unchanging, and self-knowing is real. Hence, nothing other than I is real, because everything is transient, mutable, and known, not by itself, but only by I. When we accept the existence of the world, we see we should accept the existence of a power, which we may call God, that is responsible for it, and for ordaining our prarabdha, which is whatever we are to experience in this world. As Bhagavan says in verse 1 of Upadesa Undiyar, karma giving fruit is by the ordainment of God. Can karma be God, since karma is jata, devoid of consciousness? However, because God does not appear as an object perceived through the five senses, we say we do not believe in him. This is like saying that we see the pictures on the cinema screen but do not see the light that illumines them. The world is those pictures, and God is the self-knowing light I am, which makes the appearance of the world and the functioning of karma possible. The world does not exist apart from the body or the mind, as Bhagavan says in verses 5 and 6 of Uladu Narpadu. The world is merely an expansion of the mind projected through the five senses of the body. The world picture is projected on the screen that is the mind. It is illuminated by the mind, and it is seen by the mind. Therefore, since this mind is nothing other than self, in verse 1 of Uladu Narpadu, Bhagavan says, the picture of names and forms, the world, the one who sees it, the screen on which it depends, and the pervading light of consciousness that illumines it. All these are he, the first thing or base, which is self. To mistake a body which is one of the pictures to be I, and thus to feel that the world which is all the other pictures is other than and outside of I, is a delusion, Maya. Without this delusion, I am the body, no world picture would be seen. Because we thus limit I, thinking it to be within a body, the concepts of inside and outside arise. So long as the delusion, I am this body, is experienced as real, the world will also be experienced as real. Therefore, the only way to experience the unreality and non-existence of the world is to investigate this feeling, I am the body. When we do so, it will disappear, and then we shall no longer be troubled by the false appearance of this world. What is meditation? Who can meditate? Can the body meditate? Can self meditate? Meditation is just a means of feeding the non-existent I. The true sadhana is to be vigilant at all times against the rising of this I. One way to prevent the rising of I is to try to behave inwardly as well as outwardly in every situation, as you think Bhagavan would behave. If you practice this, there will be less and less of I, and more of Bhagavan, until finally you will be swallowed by him. Whenever peace is disturbed, it is due to the rising of I. Peace cannot be enjoyed while I is active. Therefore, the only means to hold on to peace is to be self-vigilant, thus guarding against the intrusion of disturbing thoughts. Self-attention is not an activity, but a calm state of being vigilant, keenly watching I, and thereby preventing the intrusion of mental activity. Meditation, which is a mental activity, is unreal, so it can never reveal what is real. Non-meditation, which is avoiding mental activity, alone can reveal the reality. In the first Mangalam verse of Uladunarpadu, Bhagavan says, since the reality I am exists without thought in the heart, how to meditate upon that reality which is called heart? Being in the heart as it is, that is as I am, is alone meditating correctly upon reality. Since thought is paying attention to second or third persons, the only effective means to avoid thought is self-attention. The rising of I is attention to second and third persons, so attention to the first person alone can make I subside. The reason why Bhagavan emphasizes that the appearance of the world is dependent upon the delusion, I am this body, is to kindle vairagya, desirelessness, by making us understand that I am the body is the root of all misery, and that it must therefore be eradicated. Cutting the branches or even the trunk of the tree of delusion is futile because its root, I am the body, must be destroyed. It is destroyed only by self-attention. This is why Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uladunarpadu, if the ego which is the embryo or root comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If the ego does not exist, everything does not exist. The ego itself is everything. Therefore, know that investigating what is this ego is alone giving up everything. We must fly on the two wings of viveka, discrimination, and vairagya, desirelessness. We all have a clear knowledge of our own existence, I am. If we give importance only to that and try to remain as it, that is self-attention, guarding against the rising of I, avoiding attention to second and third persons, and vigilance against the intrusion of thoughts. In everything we do there is emness. I am walking, I am thinking, and so on. If we attend to this emness and try to abide as it, that is sufficient. There is no need to be concerned about thoughts. Let them come or go. Thoughts are only thoughts because we attend to them. If we ignore them, they do not exist. Our sense of emness, asmitva, signifies our self-awareness or mere being. Mere being is the final goal. That is why Natanaranandar was saying that one day we will laugh at our present efforts. When waves of passion such as desire, lust, or fear arise, either try to duck beneath them by self-attention, or else reflect on their uselessness and avoid them by discrimination, viveka, and dispassion, vairagya. If the waves continue to come more strongly and none of these methods help, pray to Bhagavan. Prayer coming from an agonized heart has its own power. Whenever we feel helpless, prayer is our best weapon. He is always ready to help the helpless if their prayer is sincere. Meritorious actions, punya karmas, done with kamyata, desire for personal benefit, do not purify the mind. Actions done without such desire, nishkamya karmas, purify the mind, but they are the least efficacious means. Unless worship and prayer are done with an attitude of ego abasement, they will not purify the mind. Worshipping with pride only feeds the ego. Better than worship is shravana, hearing or studying the Guru's teachings, and manana, reflection on them. Reading about the lives of saints and reflecting on their behavior and teachings will help us to subside our ego. Better than that is satsanga, in the company of the real sadhus, jnanis, who cannot but act with humility. Satsanga purifies the mind in many ways, but the best satsanga is to remain quietly as I am. As Shankara says in Viveka Chudamani, 100 times better than Shravana is Manana, but 1,100,000 times better than Manana is the Nidhyasana, contemplation, which is just remaining attentively as I am. The reality of whatever is seen is the same as that of what sees it. The God you see is only as real as you who see him. If you worship God in a name and form, your mind will be purified, and when it is sufficiently purified, he will appear as Guru to teach you the practice of self-attention. The Guru is not just to be worshipped, he is to be obeyed. In verse 274 of Guru Vachaka Kovai, Bhagavan says, those who do not have the clarity of mind to recognize the jnana Guru, who appears as a human form, though he is actually abiding firmly as the supreme space of consciousness I am, is formless thereby, bear the yoke of wicked conduct and sin. This is not to say that Guru Bhakti is wrong, but that our devotion is not true Guru Bhakti unless we also practice what he taught us. Though the outward form of the Guru and his teachings are a projection of our own vasanas, they will nevertheless wake us up, like a lion that an elephant sees in its dream. Self-attention is the most effective means of purifying the mind. The more you try to attend to self, and the more you thereby experience the happiness of self-abidance, the more clearly you will understand and be firmly convinced that all happiness comes only from self, and that rising as I is misery. Thus, your desirelessness, vairagya, will increase, and your attachments to things will become less. Whenever you have some moments free, reflect, what is this ego life? Now I take this body to be I and this world to be real. I feel attachment to things, people, and circumstances, but I have only experienced this life for a certain number of years, and some years from now, I will cease experiencing it forever. Therefore, why should I take interest in or be ambitious for this transient and futile life? All these things seem to exist only because I exist, so should I not try to find the truth behind this I? The more you reflect in such a way, the more you will lose interest in your life and the more you will wish to remain just as I am. When people used to say to me, "You are lucky because you were with Bhagavan," I would sometimes find some ego rising in me with pride. However, by Bhagavan's grace, I thought of a good reply. In a hospital, there is an outpatient department to treat minor cases, but the worst cases are admitted into the inpatient department to be treated under the personal supervision of the doctor. The same happens in this spiritual line, so I am such a helpless case that Bhagavan had to admit me into his inpatient department to treat me under his personal supervision. Those who are not in Bhagavan's physical presence are lucky, because they are protected from the delusion of mistaking him to be his body. Ignorance is of two types. I know and I don't know. Both depend upon the rising I, and both disappear when the rising I is scrutinized. In verse 9 of Uladu Narpadu, Bhagavan says, Dyads, pairs of opposites such as knowing and not knowing, and triads, the three factors of objective knowledge, the knower, the knowing, and the known, exist only by clinging always to one, namely our mind or ego, which alone experiences such knowledge or ignorance. If anyone looks within the mind to discover what that one is, they, the dyads and triads, will cease to exist, because the ego on which they depend will be found to be non-existent. Only those who have seen this non-existence of the ego are those who have seen the reality. See, they will not be confused. In the state of true knowledge, jnana, no I can rise either to say I know myself or I do not know myself. This is the truth that Bhagavan teaches us in both verse 33 of Uladu Narpadu and verse 2 of Sri Arunachala Ashtakam. Saying, I do not know myself or I have known myself is ground for ridicule. Why? To make oneself an object known? Are there two selves? Because being one is the truth of everyone's experience. When within my mind I investigated who the seer is, and when the seer thereby became non-existent, I saw that which remained, namely beginningless, endless, and unbroken being, consciousness bliss. The mind does not now rise to say I saw, and so in what way can the mind rise to say I did not see? Who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times even you, as Dakshinamurti, elucidated it without speaking? Only to elucidate your state without speaking, you stood shining from earth to sky, motionlessly, or as a hill. To say I know myself is as absurd as saying I do not know myself. That which is completely devoid of knowledge and ignorance is true knowledge. That which knows anything other than itself is not true knowledge, since it shines without anything that is other than itself. To know or to make known, self is true knowledge. No, it is not a void. Bhagavan once told Muruganar, it is not only that self does not know other things, it does not even know itself as I am this. In verse 26 of Upadesa Undiyar, he says, being self alone is knowing self, because self is devoid of two. That is, there are not two selves, so that one could be known by the other. Since self is indivisibly single, it can know itself only by being itself. And since being conscious of itself is its very nature, its being itself is itself, its knowing self. Whoever worships it in whatever form, giving it whatever name, that is the way to see that the nameless and formless substance, the absolute reality or God, in name and form. However, know that knowing the reality of oneself by subsiding in and becoming one with the reality of that true substance is seeing it in reality. Here, knowing the reality or truth of oneself may mean either knowing the non-existence of the ego or knowing what we really are. However, knowing the non-existence of the ego fits better into this context, considering the phrase subsiding in the reality of that true substance, though both meanings amount to the same thing, whichever way it is taken. The reality of oneself can be correctly known only by our subsiding in and becoming one with the reality of that true substance, which is our real self. Worshipping that true substance, which is also called the Supreme Reality or God, in any name or form may be a means to see visions of it in that name and form, but it cannot be a means to experience knowledge of the true nature of that reality, which is devoid of any name or form. In order to know the true nature of the reality, one must know the true nature of oneself, the knower. Therefore, in verse 1073 of Guru Vachaka Kovai, Bhagavan says, "Since the many forms of God that are obtained as visions or other such dualistic experiences, by clear, pure-hearted worship, undergo appearance and disappearance and thus perish, only one's own true nature, which always exists with clarity or certainty, is the true form of God that exists immutably. If God is experienced or known as other than the knower, he becomes an object of knowledge, and as such he depends for his existence upon the knower. Since the knower is unreal, so too is whatever it knows. Therefore, the absolute reality, or God, can only be known truly by the knower being one with it. When the knower and the known are both resolved into the one reality, that is true knowledge." Bhagavan begins verse 13 of Uladu Narpadu by saying, "Self, which is abundant knowledge, jnana, alone is real. Knowledge that is manifold, that is knowledge of multiplicity, is ignorance, ajnana. Self-knowledge shines as M. Multiplicity here includes the world, God, and the ego. Since nothing exists unless it is known, experienced, our knowledge of multiplicity is itself the existence of that multiplicity." He then continues the same verse by saying, "Even this ignorance which is unreal does not exist apart from the self, which is knowledge. All the many ornaments are unreal. Say, do they exist apart from the gold which is real? That is, even the knowledge and existence of multiplicity cannot exist apart from or independent of I am. Multiplicity is like the variety of gold ornaments, and I am is like gold, their substance. Just as a goldsmith sees only the gold, so the jnani sees only I am, which is jnana. When the jnani says that the world is unreal, he means that multiplicity is ever non-existent. And when he says that the world is real, he means that I am alone exists. Religions try to make God, who is a third person, into a second person, so that he may be known directly, sakshat. But even second persons are only known indirectly through the first person. When the light of I am passes through the film of our vasanas, it appears in two forms, as both the seer, the first person, and the seen, the second and third persons. The first person, I am so-and-so, is one of the expansions of the vasanas. That is, it is one of the pictures, a name and form, projected on the screen of being by the light of consciousness. It is the first vasana, the root of all other vasanas. In Tamil, the first person is called Tanmay Idam, which literally means the selfless place, because each of the three grammatical persons is considered to be a place, idam. The second person is called Minulai Yidam, the place that stands in front. And the third person is called Padarkar Yidam, the place that spreads out. Therefore, Bhagavan is discussing these three places when he says in verse 14 of Uladu Narpadu, if the first person, Tanmay, exists, the second and third persons, Mun Nilai, Padarkaigal, will exist. If the first person ceases to exist, because of oneself investigating the truth of the first person, the second and third person come to an end, and Tanmai, the real selfness, which shines as one undivided by the appearance of the three seemingly separate persons or places, alone is one's true state, which is self. Therefore I am is the true Tanmai, and I am so-and-so is a thief, a second person posing as if it were the first person or Tanmai. True knowledge, jnana, is attained only when the body and person that were taken to be the I, the first person, are recognized to be second persons, things that are not I. One important point to note here in this verse is that Bhagavan does not say that this false first person, the ego, actually exists, but only says conditionally, if the first person exists. He never actually accepted his existence. Until they come to Bhagavan, people generally believe that self will be experienced if they get rid of all thoughts, which are second or third persons. They don't understand that the first person, which is the root of all thoughts, must also go. That is why when some people come and ask me what my experience is, I say that I do not have any experience because in the absence of an experiencer there can be no experience. True knowledge, jnana, does not change, but the methods of teaching it have to be adapted and modified to suit the needs of people at different times. In ancient times, Dakshinamurti taught through silence. In later times, people sometimes had to serve the guru humbly for 12 years, without receiving any spiritual instructions. But by then their mind had become so pure that on hearing just one word or phrase of instruction, they experienced the reality. Later still, Adi Shankara established the truth of Advaita in the minds of scholars who were learned in the ancient scriptures. But in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, we can see that he dealt inadequately with many subtle aspects of Advaita. For our present times, it was necessary for Bhagavan to give us simple but refined explanations about everything in order to turn us selfwards. Nowadays, there are 1,001 different meditations and 1,001 different yogas. So Bhagavan had to introduce a new term, self-attention. However, only the term is new, because after some time you will understand that self-attention is ever going on. It is our eternal nature, because self is never unaware of itself. Through his tapas, Bhagavan has stored up such a vast wealth that we as children need never worry about doing any tapas. Our only task is to enjoy our inheritance. When heroes like Bhagavan were thirsty, they took a crowbar and dynamite and dug a well single-handedly. Now he has prepared a well, a pump set, taps, and tumblers to enable us to drink. But we are such useless creatures, we are just too lazy even to drink. He has given us this simple practice of self-attention. But we complain, "Oh Bhagavan, who is this? Oh Bhagavan, this who am I is very difficult." If the first person I, the ego or subject exists, second and third persons, you, he, she, it, this, that, and so on, will exist. Because of oneself scrutinizing the truth of the first person, if the first person ceases, second and third persons will come to an end, and the state for selflessness that then shines as one, not divided as these three persons, is indeed the true state of self. In Tamil, the first person, second person, and third persons are called the three places, rather than three persons. So verse 14 of Uladunarpadu considers these three divisions of place, whereas verse 15 considers the three divisions of time, present, past, and future. Verse 16 concludes by re-emphasizing the unreality of both time and place. Throughout our waking and dream life, we generally ignore the first person and the present moment, and instead attend mostly to second and third persons and to past and future. All thoughts pertain to second and third persons and to past and future, But if we try to make a thought of the first person or of the present moment, the mind will subside, since I and now are not other than self. Hence, investigating what, when, or where is the present moment is the same as investigating who or what am I. We are like a person in a triangular prison, because we attend to only two of the three walls, second and third persons, or past and future. We think that we are imprisoned. But if we try to turn our attention towards the third wall, the first person or present moment, we will discover that there is no such wall, and that our bondage is therefore ever non-existent. When we first discover that the third wall does not exist, we will desire to run in that direction in order to escape from the prison. This is similar to the experience of spurana, the fresh clarity of self-awareness that arises when we investigate the first person or present moment. But Guru then makes us see that since the third wall is actually non-existent, our imprisonment bondage is also non-existent, and thus our desire to run away will subside, and we will be perfectly contented to remain where we are. This is similar to the subsidence of spurana, the state in which perfect clarity of self-awareness is found to be our real nature rather than something new. This is our natural state, sahaja sthiti, in which we are perfectly content to be just as we are. The perpetual wandering of our attention from one second or third person to another, and to and fro between past and future, is like the swinging of a pendulum, whose central vertical axis is I am or now. Just as a swinging pendulum is never out of contact with its vertical axis, yet never rests there, our attention is never out of contact with its center. I am or now, yet never rests there. The state in which our attention rests in I am and in now is known as Atma Nishta or Samadhi, which means sama, di, even, balanced, equipoised, or equanimous mind, and is similar to a steadily resting pendulum. Because our attention never rests, time never rests, and so the present moment is never truly experienced. Time is an incessant flow from past to future. If we try to know the truth of the present moment by attending to the second and third persons, we would be like a man trying to step on the head of his own shadow, because second and third persons are experienced in the illusory flow of time and not in the precise present moment. If we try to measure something without knowing the value of a single unit of our measurement, whether that be dollars, kilos, or whatever, we would not know the value of what we had measured. It is equally futile to try to know the truth of the past or future without knowing the true nature of the present. As Bhagavan says in verse 15 of Uladu Narpadu, past and future stand depending on the present. While occurring, they are both only present. Therefore, the present is only one time that actually exists. Hence, without knowing the truth of the present, trying to know the past or future is like trying to count without knowing the value of the unit one. The truth of the present is that it is non-existent. If we know that, then we can judge the true value of all other knowledge. The present, place, and time, the here and now, is I am. No second or third person can truly exist in the here and now, because they are all objects known by the first person, which alone is here, and hence they occupy places other than here. Second and third persons are subject to change, and hence to time. So they exist only in the constant flow of time from past to future, never stopping in the present. Therefore, they can never be experienced in the precise present moment, the now. Hence, being in the here and now can only mean being in self, which is our natural state of self-attention. The here and now is not an object. It is the subject, I, and hence it can only be known by non-objective attention. Nishta means standing in. A pendulum can stand only in its own center. It cannot stand either to the right or to the left. Likewise, the mind cannot stand by attending to second or third persons, because attention to anything other than itself draws it away from its center. It can stand only in its own center, by attending only to itself. When it stands in its center, it is no longer the mind, but is only self itself. Presence implies knowledge. If we say that self is present, that implies we know self. Bhagavan frequently reminded us that self is here and now, ever known or realized. Self-knowledge is the base of all other knowledge, as he says in verse 13 of Uladu Narpadu. Self, which is knowledge, jnana, alone is real. Manifold knowledge, knowledge of multiplicity, is ignorance, ajnana. Even such ignorance, which is unreal, does not exist apart from self, which is knowledge. All the many ornaments are unreal. Say, do they exist apart from gold, their substance, which is real? Other things can be known only if self is known. Knowing any object is knowing self. That does not mean that the object is experienced as I, but only that the object can be known only if I is known. Because in order to experience I know this object, I must experience itself. When people ask me if I know self, I always reply, I know nothing that you do not know. I don't know any wonderful and glorious self, I just know that I am. In Nan-yar, who am I, Bhagavan says that unless perception of the world appearance ceases, self cannot be known as it really is. However, even if the world is perceived, it shows that self is known, because it is perceived only because I am. This is why Bhagavan says in verse 6 of Arunachala Ashtakam, O Hill of Grace, let them appear or not appear. What does it matter? Apart from you, they do not exist. It is the nature of the mind to wander and know many things. But why does that worry you? Because you identify this mind as I. You feel your attention is wandering. But are you this mind? You are that which knows the mind. Bhagavan often used the term udasina bhava, which means an attitude of indifference. And it is necessary for us to have such an attitude towards the mind. What is required is a change of identification. Instead of taking the mind to be I, take that which knows the mind to be I. I jokingly call this change of identity a forgery, though the actual forgery is our present false identification with the mind. The mind's attention is always knowing something, but what you must understand is that the mind has no power of attention of its own. The mind's power of attention exists only because we attend to the mind. If instead you attend to that which knows the mind, how can the wandering of the mind affect you? J. Krishnamurti says, observe, observe, and let the mind take its own course, as if it wouldn't do so anyway, even without our permission. In a way, what he says is right, though I don't know whether he means it in the right way or not. What he should mean is, remain just as the observer. If you do so, the observing will immediately cease, because if you attend to the observing will not be attended to, it will not be known, and hence it will not exist. I have not heard him myself, and all those who tell me what he says seem to have a very poor understanding of what he means. Most religions say that God created the world, and that you are a small something in the world. But this only adds to our confusion. Bhagavan says, you are, and the world appears only because you are. This should not be taken to mean that the world really appears. It only seems to appear. That is, its appearance is not like the appearance of something that actually exists, such as the water that appears when we open a tap, but is on the contrary like the appearance of something that just seems to exist, such as the water that appears in a mirage. Therefore cease identifying yourself with either the world or the knower of the world. Just try to remain as I am, without identifying I am as anything else, such as the body or mind. You know other things only because I am is identified as something else. This is how the false I or mind arises. If I am is not identified with anything at all thoughts and perceptions will cease. There is truly no difficulty in turning your attention towards that third wall, but so long as you identify your mind as I, it will appear that you are not succeeding. In Tamil, Bhagavan often used nam, the inclusive first-person pronoun we, to denote self, as in verse 16 of Uladu Narpadu. In Tamil, there are two distinct first-person plural pronouns, nam, which includes whoever is addressed, and nangal, which excludes whoever is addressed. When referring to self, Bhagavan always used the inclusive nam rather than the exclusive nangal. Except we, on scrutiny, where is time and where is place? If we are a body, we will be ensnared in time and place. But are we a body? Since we are one, now, then, and always one, here, there, and everywhere in space, there is only we, the timeless and placeless we. The first sentence of this verse should not be interpreted to mean where are time and place apart from us, because this could imply that time and place are real. What Bhagavan means by asking the rhetorical question is that on scrutiny, nothing exists except us. We alone are, and there is neither time nor place. This implied meaning is reiterated in the final sentence, which can mean either there is only we who are devoid of time and place, or there is only we, time and place do not exist. When Bhagavan first wrote this verse, he referred only to time, but when he modified it to refer to place also, in the original version, which is now verse 13 of Upadesa Tanipakal, individual verses of instruction, he wrote, "Except we, where is time? Without scrutinizing ourselves, if we think we are a body, time will swallow us. But are we a body? We are always one now, in time past and in time to come. Therefore there is only we who have swallowed time." Time and place or space are the first manifestations of mind or maya, and without this conception of time and place, the mind could not arise. Therefore, to escape from this prison of time and place, we should attend to the first person or the present moment. Attention is the power which allows for the manifestation of everything. By turning it selfward, the same power of attention can be used to merge everything back into its source. We, that power of attention, alone are. Why identify yourself as a person? We are. But why add the adjunct a person? Simply find out what this I am is. There are two processes in spiritual practice sadhana. One is ascending and the other is descending. The ascending process is negating everything as not I. By refining our mere awareness I am, distangling it from all its superfluous adjuncts, and this leads to the rising of spurana, a fresh and intense clarity of self-awareness. The descending process is embracing everything as I by recognizing that I alone exist, and all else seems to exist only because I am. This descending process leads to the subsidence of spurana, which is our natural state, sahaja sthiti. In Upadesa Undiyar, the second and third of the three lines of each verse ends with the word undipara, which is a compound of two verbs, undi, which means rise, and para, which means fly. So it can mean rise and fly, but only means play, undi, an ancient game played by children, which probably involved jumping and singing. Undiyar is thus an ancient style of song composed in a particular meter, and such songs were originally composed to accompany that game. In this playful style of song, Bhagavan expressed the highest truth, because such truth can be grasped only by a childlike mind. The mind of the child is like a clean slate, whereas the mind of an older person is like a well-scribbled slate, burdened with many deep-rooted beliefs and preconceived ideas. In Crumbs from His Table, chapter 13, Some Surprising Incidents, Ramana Anda Swarnagiri recalls, Sri Bhagavan was correcting and aiding some youngsters of not more than 10 years of age in memorizing his Sanskrit work Upadesa Saram, and the writer was laughing, so to say, up his sleeve at the futility of coaching these youngsters who could not understand the ABC of this highly metaphysical poetry. Without the utterance of a single word, Sri Bhagavan turned to him and remarked that though these children might not understand the meaning of these poems then, yet they would be of immense help to them and would be recalled with great relief and pleasure when they came of age and were in difficulties. There are no outward signs distinguishing someone in the fifth standard, the state of non-dual self-love, Svatmad Bhakti, which is the highest stage in the school of Bhakti described in Chapter 2 of the second part of the path of Sri Ramana. They will always appear to behave like Puka devotees in the fourth standard, the stage of Guru Bhakti. Many gurus were all jnanis from the time they started composing verses, but they spent all their lives like second standard students, devotees who worship or pray to many different names and forms of God, visiting so many temples and writing verses in praise of their temple deities. Even Bhagavan behaved like a good devotee of Arunachala. He did Giri Pradakshina, circumambulation around the hill, and encouraged others to do so. He never allowed anyone to walk round him, garland him, or do puja to him. Instead, he always pointed to Arunachala as the form of the Guru, saying that it is the true Ramana Satguru, and he was often moved to tears on reading or hearing stotras, devotional songs. On his last evening, he hadn't opened his eyes for 2 hours, but at about 8 p.m., when we started to sing Akshara Ramana Malai with its refrain, Arunachala Shiva, he opened his eyes for a few moments, and from then till 8:47, tears of devotion were pouring down his cheeks. He left his body as we were singing verse 72, Protect me, Arunachala, being the support for me to cling to, so that I may not droop down like a tender creeper without anything to cling to. Once while walking round the hill, Bhagavan did Pradakshina in Durvasa's shrine as an example to others, saying jokingly, even if we ignore other shrines, we should not ignore Durvasa, because Durvasa was an ancient sage who was noted for his hot temper. However, he never prostrated to any deity or person. Muruganar also exemplified fourth standard bhakti. He always showed great reverence for Bhagavan in every possible way, such as keeping his picture at a high level, and never wearing shoes near any picture of him. At the mere mention of Bhagavan's name, he would shed tears. In so doing, he exemplified the teaching that Bhagavan gave in verse 39 of Uladu Narpadu Anubandham. Always experience Advaita, non-duality, in your heart, but do not ever put Advaita in action. O son, Advaita is appropriate in the three worlds, but know that with Guru Advaita is not appropriate. This is, even if one can claim a non-dual status in the presence of any of the three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, one should never claim a non-dual status with Guru. When people ask me why I do Pradakshina and prostrate to Arunachala, I reply, if you see me as an ego, then it is right that I do so. Or if you see me as self, then it is not I, but only this body that does so. Advaita cannot be put into action because it is the state that is completely devoid of action, since any action implies duality. However, no action can alter the fact that non-duality is the truth. Someone once said to Bhagavan, "Bhagavan, this self-inquiry is very difficult. Can I instead practice such and such a yoga or meditation?" To which he nodded in assent. After that person left, some of the devotees were wondering why Bhagavan seemed to give his consent to such practices. So he explained. He says, self-inquiry is difficult, which means that he does not want to practice it, so what can I do? Even if I tell him not to practice this other yoga or meditation, he still won't practice self-inquiry. In a few months, he will return and say that meditation is difficult and ask whether he can do japa instead. And after practicing japa for some time, he will find his mind still wanders. So he will then come and ask if he can sing stotras. All this will mean that he is unfit to do anything. If one is able to make even a little effort to sing stotras or do japa or any other sadhana, one can make the same amount of effort to attend to the feeling I am. On another occasion, someone told Bhagavan that they were afraid that they would be wasting their time if they practiced self-inquiry, because though they have tried to practice it, they found that they always become inattentive and ask whether it would not therefore be better if they practiced some japa instead. Bhagavan replied, "You have nothing to fear. You are like a person who is afraid to let go of a branch even though they are standing on the ground. Do you suppose that even when you lose your hold on self, self can ever lose its hold on you?" When Muruganar was once asked about other gurus, he replied, "I have been blinded by the sun, so I cannot see anything else." As Bhagavan explains in verses 17 and 18 of Uladu Narpadu, an ajnani limits I to the extent, the form of the body, and limits reality to the extent of the world. As a result, ajnanis do not take I and the reality to be one and the same. The ajnani, on the other hand, sees that I shines as the limitless self, and that reality shines as the formless substratum of the world, and therefore knows that the reality is I. Because the jnani knows that self alone really exists, he does not see anything as non-self, and hence he knows that even the body is I, and even the world is real. However, we should take care not to misunderstand the jnani's statement that the world is real. What the jnani sees as real is just the isness of the world. But a jnani and an ajnani will say, "This is a table," but the ajnani sees only its form and therefore mistakes its isness to be a property of that form. Whereas in the view of the jnani, only isness, being or sat, is real. So the table is nothing other than that infinite, indivisible, and hence formless isness. Therefore, because the jnani experiences the body as I, and the world is real, he seems to behave just like ajnanis, but the difference between them lies in their understanding of I and of reality. Though this difference in their perspective is very subtle, it is actually quite vast, like the difference between a mountaintop and a valley. During sadhana, we have to reject everything other than I as anatma, non-self or not myself. But when we experience I as it really is, we will discover that nothing is other than it. The practice of rejecting everything other than I is by not attending to any such thing is sometimes described as an ascending process, whereas the state of true knowledge in which everything is experienced as not other than I is sometimes described as a descending process, though it is not actually a process, but our natural state of being. Therefore, when Bhagavan describes in verses 17 and 18 of Uladu Narpadu, is this descending process, the state of sahaja samadhi, in which everything is embraced as I. This state is what is indicated in Shastras by statements such as, all this is Brahman, But since Pandits think of Brahman as if it were a third person, they fail to grasp the true meaning of such hints. Brahman should always be regarded as the first person I, because it is our natural state of pure, non-dual self-awareness. Only when one thus understands Brahman to be only I can one have the correct outlook, drishti, that such scriptural statements were intended to inculcate, which is the outlook required for the practice of sahaja samadhi. This outlook is the attitude, all this is only because I am. That is the firm conviction that everything that I experience, namely the mind, body, and world, and all that happens in them, could not exist if I did not exist to experience them, so that they are entirely dependent upon my being consciousness I am. By clinging firmly to this attitude, one can practice self-attention even while engaged in outward activities.